Great to have you here, Maria, and it'll be interesting to be on the other side of questions from you, and hopefully I can keep up.
Well, that's the thing. I'm usually not on the other side of the microphone, so
Exactly.
I'm not really
So
sure
we
what
look
to
forward.
expect this morning, but okay.
Throughout her career, Maria has not just reported on financial markets, she has actually shaped the discourse and challenged the status quo and brought insights to millions of people. As you know, she was the first journalist to report live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and she launched Squawk Box, Closing Bell, and Market Watch on CNBC. She then went on to Fox Business Networks, where she launched Mornings with Maria, Sunday Morning Futures, and Maria Bartiromo's Wall Street. Her journalism has won her 2 Emmys, a Gracie Award, and she was named one of the people who shaped the decade by the Financial Times. But really, most importantly, if that's not enough, Maria has become part of the pop culture and has played herself in several movies that I'm sure many of you have seen. Wall Street 2, opposite Michael Douglas, and Arbitrage with Richard Gere. So a highly, highly unusual reach. Please join me in a warm welcome to Maria Bartiromo. And at the end of our conversation, we will take questions on Slido using #LegendsLive. So let's get going here, Maria. There's so much to go through, but before you became a household name, what was your family background like? You grew up in Brooklyn. What did that upbringing influence you with?
Yes, I grew up in Dyker Heights, Brooklyn. My father had a restaurant. My grandfather, Carmine Bartiromo, came here in 1906. Like many of us, all of us, we have a beautiful immigrant story. My grandfather came from Naples with $13 in his pocket. He was a builder in Italy, a construction worker, really. He went into the army in World War I and then came back and built a restaurant. He named it the Rex Manor after the ship, the Rex, which used to transport Italians from Italy to America in the 1930s. And my dad took it over, and I was the coat check girl. So that was my first job. Grew up in a middle-class family. Both my mother and my father worked. I always knew that if I wanted to do something, I needed to earn it myself. Very much, that was part of my value system growing up. Very close to my family, still am. My mom now lives with me. I moved her in with me. She's an angel, and she was going on 93 years young. And I credit my parents for that upbringing, for much of my belief system and my values.
I mean, that is the story that many of us have. But I think you really did make history in a different way by becoming the first journalist on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange live in an atmosphere that was probably pretty male-dominated. What was the experience like to do that?
It was incredible. I mean, I first started in this industry at CNN, and when I got to CNN right out of college at NYU, we were just beginning to understand how to cover a news event as it was happening during the first Gulf War. And this was Ted Turner's CNN. So he was trying things that nobody else was trying. I mean, it used to be that you would get your news at 6:30 at night. But he said, we want to cover news as it's happening. So the Gulf War is happening. I'm a production assistant, a PA right out of college, and I'm watching the Gulf War underway. And I've got Bernard Shaw, the reporter, there under the bed in Baghdad saying bombs are going off. And that really set me up for when I eventually went on air. I left CNN after 5 years as a producer and went on air on CNBC and understood how to cover an event live as it was happening, which set me up to get on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and cover the market's movements as they were trading. We were starting a new show called Squawk Box. We wanted to be in the middle of it all. We wanted to bring the cameras to where the action was. At the time, as many of you remember, there were 5 rooms in the trading floor. There were 5,000 people on the floor running around. It was very fast-paced. We asked Dick Grasso if we could bring cameras down to the floor and not just be on that podium above. He said yes. He said, Maria, yeah, I knew Dick because I worked at the Exchange a little as a producer from CNN. He said, Maria's the one to do it. Let's do it. Went down to the floor. It was incredible because it was new to all involved, myself as well as the traders. So when I started, I was on the floor, and there was a camera way, way, way back there. It was like on the ceiling. Nobody really knew when we were live, when we weren't live, because they weren't TVs on the floor of the exchange at this point. So I was standing there. I knew where the camera was. It was zooming into me, but everybody around me really didn't. So half of them were bumping into me just because literally I was in the way. And the other half just wanted to say, hey, Mom, I was on TV today. So it was really fun. I made a lot of friends on the floor of the exchange, but there were certainly times when it was hard. And some people did not want me there, and I did get into a few
discussions.
Yeah, you could say that.
But how you've evolved, because when I look at it and I look at the modern media environment that I know pretty well, you know very, very well here right now, you've got a reputation of getting straight answers from some of the most powerful people in the world. How do you get trust from people in these kind of situations so that they're actually willing to give you honest answers? And we're going to come into honesty in media in a moment and all the things that are going on. How do you do it?
Well, I think it is about trust. I think I spend my life trying to gain the trust of people that I want to speak to. And that involves truth, and it involves being real with people, and having integrity, and being a woman of my word. One incident that happened on the floor of the exchange was, many of you may know him, may he rest in peace, Mike Robbins. I'll tell you a quick story.
Sure.
I was at the exchange. I found out that my boss's boss, Jack Welch, was coming to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and I thought, amazing, what a break for me. Jack Welch is coming to the floor, and I get to show him around. So I was very close at that point. I'd met this specialist in GE, and he told me, what the order flow was and who were the buyers and, what he was seeing. And I said, oh, this is such great info. Jack is going to eat this all up. Jack's going to love this. I'm going to take Jack over to you, and will you please tell Jack? So one morning I went over to George. George was the specialist, and I said, it was about, I don't know, it was after the open. It wasn't so busy. It was about like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I tipped over to George. I said, I wanted to tell him Jack was coming. I said, George. And Mike Robbins was there. He was, I didn't realize, the biggest broker. He was on the board of the New York Stock Exchange. I didn't realize his presence. And he said to me, run along, get away from here. We don't care about your little TV show. And I just remained, when you have the knots in your stomach, you've got I had all these people watching me. They're waiting for an answer, waiting for a fight. And I stopped and I said, don't speak to me that way. And then I turned around and I ran away. But I went back and I did bring Jack to George. George did talk to Jack. And then later I went up to Dick's office and I said, Dick, that's not right. Why is this, why do I have to get harassed by this guy? And he's like, Maria, you're right. But you know what? You're on the floor. We've never done this. And frankly, Mike Robbins doesn't like it, and he doesn't want you around. So just keep out of his way. It's fine. Then Mike comes up. We had to have a conversation knee to knee. And he told me, look, I don't care about your little TV show. Don't get in my way at all. It was really hard. So anyway, I used to walk around the building so that I didn't see Mike Robbins. And at one point, he always had a comment for me. He really hated me. So he would say something like, when he saw me, save your money. Like, save your money. You're not going to account to anything. And so I got through it. Finally, I found out George was leaving the floor. I was like, amazing. Mike Robbins was leaving the floor. And I was so happy because even when Mike saw me talking to other traders to get information, they got reamed. Everybody. So everyone was afraid of Mike Robbins, and God forbid they saw him talk to me.
But Maria, this must have been training for you, because what I wanted to get in, you've now interviewed countless CEOs, Fed chairs, Treasury secretaries, presidents, etc., world leaders. Was Mike the toughest nut to crack?
He was. He always would yell at me. So one day he said that to me. It was in the middle of the dot-com crash. And I was I couldn't go around the building. I had to get to my spot. We were live. The market was down big. Dot-com's crashing. And sure enough, I walk by him. Save your money, he says to me. And I turn around and I go, no, you save yours. And then I thought, yes, I got back at Mike Robbins. So I got to my spot. I did my thing. A couple of weeks later, somebody invites me to a Goldman Sachs party, and I said, okay, this will be great. I'm going to have all my business cards. I'm going to give out all my business cards, meet new sources at Goldman. And all of a sudden, I'm standing there. Who walks in but Mike Robbins? And I said, oh my God, I'm going to be mortified. He is going to embarrass me in front of all of these people. I'm sure he's going to say, go save your money. So I just said, you know what, I'm done. I met enough people, I'm out of here. So I was leaving, I'm backpedaling out of the place. On my shoulder, Maria, it's Mike Robbins. And I said, oh, yes, hello. And he says, I want to shake your hand. I've never seen your little TV show, but I want you to know I read your column in Business Week. You're doing a good job. And I thought, wow. And I was so relieved. And I thought, you know what, it's okay. You know, we got through it. And I think that did toughen me up. And I think being on the floor and being, you know, whacked around for a little while did toughen me up. And it made me realize that a lot of the people on the floor, I actually knew more than them. They knew where the flow was. They knew who was buying and who was selling and where the action was. But I knew why. I knew the news, you know, and so they would ask me. And I thought, you know what, sometimes it doesn't appear, everything isn't what it appears. And so I realized as long as I did my stuff, as long as I read up and I studied and knew the facts, nobody could touch me.
But now that leads into, you know, the next level of discussion, without getting political. Trust in the media is strained all over the place here right now. Talking about tough people to interview, what challenges do you face when you interview someone like President Trump? He's dominated the news cycle. He commands a lot of strong reactions from many people, one way or the other. How do you deal with that?
Well, you've got to be ready for Trump. I mean, the president moves around a lot, you know, like I'll bring up one thing and he's over here on another thing. And so then, you know, he like sidesweeps my question and then you know, so you don't, I've had to learn. I've interviewed the president now many times. And I think going into an interview with the president, I have to have my questions very organized and know what I really want to solicit from him. And no matter where he goes, go back to it, you know, and in a polite way, you know, sir, I want to get back to this, or, you know, Mr. President, I wanted to go back to what I asked initially. It is tough. Interviewing President Trump is tough. He's got a lot on his mind, and he goes wherever he wants in interviews. But, you know, the training and ensuring that I have gained the trust of that person is important to me. And I want people to know that I am a woman of my word. And I am not going to, you know, do gotcha on you. It's not what I'm interested in. It wasn't what I was interested in at CNBC, and it's not what I'm interested in Fox. Because when I was at CNBC, all I did was, where's the growth, where's the growth? I mean, I traveled the world looking for the growth and interviewing CEOs, heads of business, some heads of state. I did interview presidents when I was there as well, but it was largely about business. Where, you know, my big get would be Jeff Immelt, Jamie Dimon, you know, like Sandy Weill,
Jane
Fraser. So I think when I got to Fox, it was different because I knew nothing about politics when I got to Fox. I was an independent. I've always been an independent, and I wasn't interested in one side or the other. But what happened when I got to Fox was I tripped over what I knew it at the time, but now I really realize one of the biggest stories, and that was Russia collusion. And I tripped over it. All I was doing my thing, covering, you know, what was going on and trying to investigate, you know, what was truth and what wasn't. And I got there and I started at Fox in 2014. 2015, Trump and Melania come down the escalator, and all of a sudden this story blows up that Trump is colluding with Russia. And then he wins, and oh, Trump cheated. He colluded with Russia. And I had been to Russia many times. I knew that Russia tries to undermine the United States on many levels. In fact, when I went to Russia the first time, I was interviewing Medvedev, and one of my sources in Treasury was Hank Paulson's Treasury. And he said to me, Maria, don't bring your BlackBerry. Don't bring, you know, as soon as you enter Russian airspace, they're going to have access to all your stuff. And so I had a burner phone. I had a different email. My assistant was sending me things. I knew that. I also just sniffed out the truth. I had a good instinct on who to trust. I started talking a lot with lawmakers Devin Nunes and John Ratcliffe. And when I figured out that this whole notion that Trump colluded with Russia to steal an election was actually just made up, it was just simply one political campaign trying to take down another political campaign.
But at the same time, what do you think people misunderstand about the president that makes him such a polarizing figure? I mean, what advice would you give him when you think something that concerns people here, things like tariffs, which they've rolled out why are some of these issues so polarizing, and what do you think they really don't understand about the president from your standpoint?
Well, I think, President Trump is a little bit of he went into Washington not knowing anything about politics. And he went in as a rough and tumble business guy from Queens. And, he says what he wants to say. He had the mean tweets, and he has his own opinions about things, and that turned people off. And, his approach to things is very, in some cases, raw. I think he's learned a lot in the last administration and, his second term, and he's less so today. But, part of the reason that he resonates with a big portion of people is just because of that. Because you might like it, you might not like it, but you know where he stands on things. And I think people sometimes need an explainer about that. I mean, we all know he says what he wants to say, and in some cases it could be rough. And that's what I think people had to get through before actually understanding what he knows.
But now we had a tragedy last week with a shooting, an assassination. In today's polarized environment, the debate can potentially turn violent, as we saw last week. What role should business leaders play in this fractured environment to bridge the divide? Do you see a role for business in this dialogue?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think business, in some cases, doesn't always look at America as their number one constituent. Business is global, and I think we all need to play a role in taking down the rhetoric and taking down the temperature. There are people who are very fragile, and when things are said, they believe it. I mean, this whole campaign season got so ugly, with one side calling the other side Nazis. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, and to throw it around as if it's so cavalier. I mean, it's disgusting, but it's worse than that. It's impactful. It's impacting people who may be fragile,
right,
and they're moving on it. And so I think we all have to recognize the impact of our words.
Do you think last week was a watershed moment?
Well, I do. I mean, I think, Charlie Kirk, if nothing else, was an activist for free speech and an activist for the Constitution. He was a patriot. He loved this country, and it rubbed some people the wrong way. I do think it was a watershed moment in that it has created a determination for some to make his movement bigger, to ensure that people understand what he was trying to do, to try to travel the country, talk to young people about the president's agenda, and talk to young people about getting involved in your community to do good. That's all he was doing. And he did it I actually, in the last few months, have been talking a lot with Charlie. I went on his podcast, he came on my show, and I think that I really think that God wanted me to understand Charlie and what he was doing better. And that's why I got closer to Charlie in the last few months. It was weird because I was supposed to go on his show Wednesday night. And they called me and I said, no, I have a trip to Italy. I can't do Wednesday. Let's do, the next week. And I think God wanted me to see how Charlie does it in a calm way, talking to young people, hearing them out to try to see, what they're doing and how they can be better humans and contribute to our society. And I take it very seriously, and I have learned from Charlie.
It's interesting because that leads into something that some of us of an older generation are potentially concerned about. Not quite social media, but the impact of TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, all is a significant shift in terms of how young consumers are consuming their version of the news. How do you see sort of established journalism evolving here right now when, frankly, they're not reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. They're watching feeds, and some of those feeds may be bots and maybe algorithms that are not necessarily oriented towards the facts. How do you think about that from your standpoint as you develop new programming? Is this a threat? What's your perspective?
Well, I do think
critical.
that it is worrisome that we have such short attention spans. But that is the reality. People do get their news from social media increasingly. And I think when social media first came on the stage, I mean, I remember when these companies were going public and it was the birth of .com, they were thought of like bulletin boards. Everybody put some information on the bulletin board. Today, it's a different situation. They're actually generating news the way that the news networks are generating news, and people are getting their news from them. So there's a huge responsibility in terms of what they're putting out there. I want free speech, I want open dialogue, but I also want responsible content. And so, I mean, I think parents have to make an assessment in terms of how much screen time young kids are having and how much exposure they have to some of the content. It can be dangerous. I think this is a serious issue, actually.
But let me ask you, as a member of, if I could say, the establishment from that standpoint, do you think that you need to adjust your programming in order to be able to reach that generation of people? Or is cable news going to get lost and overtaken by short-form video and, frankly, by folks that, some of it may be factual and informative, and some of it may be bots that are coming out of a North Korean farm? How do you deal with that?
Well, look, I mean, I take my responsibility very seriously, and it's ours to lose. The market share is ours to lose. The good news about this explosion of information, by the way, the first book I wrote was called Use the News, How to Separate the Noise from the Investment Nuggets. And that was in early 90s. And imagine how much more information we have today. So I think the onus is on me and my colleagues to ensure that we're doing things responsibly and reporting facts and reporting informed analysis and opinion. But also the onus is on everybody to understand that we're being flooded with information. And some of it is not true, and some of it is wrong-headed. So I think today the onus is on all of us to ensure that we are separating what's important to what's not. And by the way, the reason that I left CNBC is for this reason. And this was 12 years ago. So I was at CNBC 20 years, and I was coming up to, it was a round number, and I just thought, well, let me look at my options. And so I was hearing increasingly from CEOs who were saying, Maria, it's too much of a knee-jerk reaction. We don't want to treat investing like a football game. And a sports situation, and we want long-term investing. And I actually went to my boss, and I said to him, look, Mark, I've been hearing from a lot of CEOs and managers of businesses, and they think we are way too short-term oriented, and we think nobody cares about the whisper number anymore.
Mad money.
Exactly, and nobody cares about these short-term knee-jerk reactions. I said, and I believe that we should have more programming about long-term investing, how to treat your money in a long-term and safe and responsible way. And he looked right at me and he said, no. He said, we have to speak to the trading desk. And I said, oh, and I was shocked. And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, yeah, we have to talk to the trading desk. It's got to be, what's a trade, what's a trade, what's a trade? I mean, he actually said that to me. And I said, okay, thank you. And I realized at that point that I needed to think about my own portfolio and think about how I can stretch my own portfolio. And that the truth is, after being fortunate enough to be on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange for all those years, I didn't want to be that person anymore. I didn't want to be on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange telling you every tick and every trade, and what's the trade, what's the trade. I wanted to look behind and so that's why I opened myself up to think, well, what about Fox? Okay, so it is, politically oriented, but maybe there is an opportunity for me to actually do something of value. And then I decided to create a program that marries policy with economics, and that was my Sunday Morning Futures program.
Right.
And that's why, you know, when they offered me a position, they said, we want you to help us build Fox Business to compete with CNBC. I said, you know what? I'm in on that because I don't want to be all short term.
Right, no, exactly right. But now you take the comments we had on social media, where I think there's a lot of responsibility with those companies in order to try and ensure some level of credibility. And we get to the AI frenzy, which on top of social media is going to produce some interesting ramifications. What technology do you think is out there that is going to fundamentally reshape our society and economics over the next 10 to 20 years? When you look ahead, is it all AI, or are there other things that you look at and say, this is going to fundamentally reshape the social and business environment from your vantage point?
Well, I do think that it's AI largely. I was just in Italy in the Ambrogetti conference, and I ran into Kai-Fu Lee, who is really one of the fathers of AI, and he made a really interesting comment that I think you would appreciate. And I said to him, first of all, where are you these days? And he said, well, I'm in Beijing. And I said, okay. I said, what do you think about AI in China versus AI in America? And he said to me, Maria, the difference between AI in America and in China is right now in America, you are using AI for information. And it's true, I'll go on ChatGPT and I'll ask questions when I'm doing interviews, or I'll write a letter or a note to someone and I'll say, make this better, whatever. I'm using it for information. But in China, Kai-Fu Lee told me that he's telling his AI assistant, get my house cleaned, pay my bills, and buy my wife a birthday present. And I said, really? Well, how do they do that? And he said, very easily. They're connected to my bank account. They are getting my house cleaned. They are paying all my bills. They know last year I bought my wife a necklace and she may want the matching earrings. And that's what we're doing. And so I thought it was really a compelling comment because it's a difference the way we're using AI here right now versus what's happening in China. And I think that was very telling. How will it change the way we live? I think we will have AI assistants. And we have to be careful about the dangers. Like, we may have avatars, and we may have programs that are mimicking our voices and our faces, and then you don't know what's real, and if you really said it, and if it's technology doing it. So there are real risks here as well. And so I'm almost happy that the U.S. is treading a little slower in that regard. I mean, I'm not saying China is ahead of us on AI. I don't think that to be the case, but the way the uses are happening are different.
But you combine AI with what we just discussed, and that is short-form video and reels. It gets harder and harder, I don't know what your view is, for people to distinguish, especially if they're fragile, what's real and what may be artificially created. I mean, do you see that as an issue?
Absolutely, 100%. That is the biggest threat right now. And I think that we need to understand whether or not what you're looking at is actually AI created. I have a hard time knowing too, because you're seeing a lot of things online, on Instagram, on TikTok. I mean, look, I also think today it's a much more dangerous world geopolitically speaking. And these are national security issues. I mean, you look at TikTok, I think there's a reason that this is going so long, and the president keeps extending this deadline, and he wants to keep it, but he needs to know that the Chinese Communist Party or adversaries of America are not controlling things. And this is all related. And, I'm grateful that I've been able to study national security issues so much being at Fox, because that now, for me, is my number one topic that I'm talking about. Everything I'm looking at is laced with national security issues.
But that then relates to how business leaders and policymakers need to approach things. So given all these shifting power dynamics and economic structure, you talk to business leaders, you talk to policymakers. What do you think are their misconceptions and outdated beliefs? Where are they getting it wrong from this standpoint, given what you see, because you have a snapshot over many of them?
Well, I think it is partly national security. I mean, I think with the whole tariff discussion and the upset over tariffs initially on April 2nd, and when the market was down so much, I mean, when the market was down 2,000 points, I got to tell you, I called my broker and said, giddy up. get me in right now and make sure that I have more exposure to stocks. Because this is a ridiculous reaction. And I think, people miss the fact that President Trump is looking through a national security lens when he's doing all of these things. And I think, tariffs, can they be inflationary? Yes, but at the same time, he's looking for fair trade. And I think people miss that sometimes. It's not just about free trade. It's about fair trade, ensuring that America is on a level playing field. That's why he's in the UK right now trying to eliminate this digital services tax in the UK and trying to ensure that America is, on a level playing field. Will it be expensive? Will it mean that prices will go up on some things? Maybe, but I'm really not worried about tariffs. And I think that some managers and I think some CEOs were overly worried about the impact, and they missed the national security issues. I mean, today, we are so reliant on the supply chains out of China. To think that 90% of the underlying components of our prescription drugs are made in China.
Correct.
That's outrageous. I mean, I have to, and I ask lawmakers all the time, well, you've been in Congress for X number of years. Why is this still the case? Why do we, rely on an adversary for our prescription drugs? And if you remember, during COVID, there was a tweet from Xinhua News or one of the news media out of China that said, well, maybe we should not send the components to America right now. Let them get sick. I mean, we can't have that. I mean, we rely 90% of our semiconductor chips that we use in the military, we're relying on them in Taiwan. Really? We're buying drones from DJI, a Chinese drone maker, meaning whatever that drone sees, the CCP can see. So some of these things are so important, and I think managers of businesses and CEOs sometimes miss that.
And do you think that they are so myopically focused that they don't look at the geopolitical impact of what's going on out there? In other words, they're concentrating. The president said the other day that maybe we should go to earnings every 6 months. As you know, everyone is focused on quarterly. Do you think it's that quarterly earnings focus that causes people to be myopic and not think about the issues that you raised?
I think it's a great point. Look, I don't know if it should be every 3 months or every 6 months. I know that President Trump does look at China and say, he said it in my interview earlier this year. He said, look, we're worried about quarterly numbers. China is looking at the next 100 years. We have to have long-term plans. And that's what I think too. That's what I was just talking about. So I think managers today, American companies, do need to recognize that it was America and the freedoms that we enjoy that enabled these companies to rise the way they are. And I think it is important to recognize the broader issues of holding on to those freedoms and ensuring that we can continue those freedoms. And national security is part of that.
It's a big deal. Let me switch gears slightly here. You've reported on the banking industry for years. You've also reported on Citi for many, many years. What's your impression about how we've changed over that time period, given all that you've seen?
Well, I think you've done a masterful job in terms of building this behemoth. Look, I think it's a different company today than when I was covering it closely at CNBC, when Sandy Weil was expanding the company globally. I've always loved Citi, and I think that the focus that you have, a smaller company, but focused on financial issues for individuals and corporations across the world, has been very successful. So I think Citi has a great reputation. It's a changed company, a very different company. Jane and her team have been very transparent in terms of where the company is going and where the growth is. So I commend you.
Are there any takeaways from your interview with Jane?
Yeah, I was happy to meet Jane and have her on the show. I thought she was very deliberate and transparent. She tried to speak to the agenda that President Trump was trying to put forth, and I think it appeared that she wanted to ensure that people understood. She wanted to work with the agenda, and she thought that Citi can be very helpful to the president in terms of communicating that agenda and enabling business and helping Americans as well as people across the world.
No, well, it was a fantastic interview for those of you that have not seen it.
Thank you.
But let me switch gears a little bit here before we get to questions. You once interviewed Prince,
Yes.
the musician. And at the end, you asked him to sing a song, but he gave you a hard time and asked you to sing.
That's right.
I mean, as a cultural zeitgeist, Prince was at. What do you remember about your time with Prince?
I love Prince. Oh, God, he left us so soon, and it was horrible. I am so proud that I got Prince to travel to Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. I mean, that in and of itself, I was like, Prince is coming to our studio.
And
You're welcome.
Did he light up the studio?
He absolutely did. And we sat down, and during the commercial break, he had his guitar. But during the commercial break, I said, so I hope you'll sing a song. He said, no, Maria, I've decided I'm not going to sing a song. I said, why not? And he said, because I'm not going to be here on your stage singing a song, and you're going to be sitting there. You have to sing. And I said, what? And I just was stunned. And the truth is I was very starstruck. And sitting there with this, rock royalty for me was such a huge deal that I froze. And I asked him to sing Purple Rain, and he said, no, you sing it. I mean, the truth is the lyrics are Purple Rain, and I forgot the lyrics. So I was sitting there, and he said to me, no, you sing it. Come on, chicken, you sing it. And I love the guy. Later, we met again in Los Angeles. I saw him again, and we became friendly. I really think that he was his own man. Remember when he had all that trouble when they wanted to take all that money from him because they wanted to license his music? And he said, no, you're not going to get my music for free. Now I am no longer Prince. I am the artist formerly known as Prince.
Right.
I thought that was so funny. And I think that in and of itself showed you that here's a guy who knows his business, is not going to give it away, is going to stand his ground. I was very impressed with Prince, even though I wouldn't sing.
So we go from Prince to President Trump.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Maria, who would you like to interview that you've not been able to get to?
Well, for me, it's like, who is the person of the moment? So, it's not necessarily that I have someone in mind that, I've got to get that person, but I really want to get the person who is important at that time. And that's really the hard thing to do. You get that person who is right now. I mean, I enjoy interviewing President Trump. I always learn something from President Trump. I'd like to interview Georgia Maloney again. I've had her a few times. I'd like to get Jay Powell. But an interview is compelling when someone is honest and when they are themselves and not putting on an air. One thing that I know for sure is the audience sees through it. TV is so transparent. If you're trying to be someone you're not, people will turn it off and they will say, oh no, he's not telling me the truth. She's not being upfront. And so it's really important for me to have a little time with the person beforehand so that they trust me, so that they know that it's okay, let it go. Let's just have a conversation and be transparent. So I don't have someone in my mind right now as the person of the moment that, but there are so many interesting people in terms of business, policy, politics. I guess I like John Fetterman a lot. I may have him on this weekend or next weekend. There's a number of CEOs that I've been talking with. I really have been delving into the subject of space recently.
I know.
I think most people don't realize why space is so important. And it's very simple. It's because that's where our satellites are. And so an adversary, if they take down a satellite, or several satellites, the lights are out in America. And this is now a national security issue. So I've been talking to different startups, working on that. Energy and healthcare. I love the idea of technology marriage to healthcare and what AI is going to be able to do and what technology has already done in terms of cancer treatments and living longer. So these are all subjects that mean a lot to me that I'm looking for guests.
So it doesn't sound like Putin's on your list.
No, I'd like to interview Putin, actually. No, I would like to interview Putin.
And see if you can get a good answer.
Yeah, I think the highest number of journalists have died in Russia, as far as anywhere in the world. I I'd like to do it. It's scary a little for me, but I think that getting him to sit down and open up to show us what, in fact, he's thinking about, what's important to him, will be very telling. So, yes.
Yeah, if he does it.
If he does it.
Thank you. We're now going to open to questions from the audience and Slido, and everyone knows I can't see that well, so there'll be microphones around, and please raise your hand. And then we've got a bunch on Slido.
Thank you. Good morning, Maria, and good morning, Leon. I'm Enrique Alvarez. I work for Citi Global Wealth. Right here, Maria, in the middle. So a couple of questions about your interviews in the course of your career. You've interviewed quite a number of business leaders throughout your career, and I'd like to know who was the most impressive to you and the reasons for that. And then you've also interviewed quite a number of financial market analysts and strategists. I'd like to know how the quality of those analysts and strategies has changed over the course of your career. In your opinion, has that evolved or devolved? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the interviews, it's a long list. I mean, I think that in business, I like to interview people who are getting their hands dirty, getting in the middle of things. I mean, I can think of the leaders of some of the major banks. Obviously, Jamie Dimon is a great interview because he's very straightforward. He's a straight talker, and it's easy to just have an easy conversation with him in terms of not just business but the broader situation and the global story. Jane was also similar in that regard when we spoke, because she can give me a real sense of what's going on across the world, given the business. I liked interviewing Eric Schmidt, formerly of Google. I love the content of technology and medicine. I interviewed the head of the Cleveland Clinic many times, and Toby Cosgrove was very transparent about what he was doing in terms of the early days of robotics. And so where I learn something, where I actually feel like I can solicit something that is impactful for a broad swath of people is what I love most. I think, analysts are sometimes unsung heroes, I think there are so many analysts that do such great work. And because of my history at CNBC, I love looking at analyst research. And even today, when I'm looking at, politics and policy, I always check what my favorite analysts are saying in their reports. I've got a number of analysts that I still speak with regularly. It's hard to choose one person who is like the best interview and why, but those are some of the things that I look for when I'm interviewing CEOs. I like to talk to lots of people, not just CEOs and managers of business, but people who can actually give me a sense of what's really going on. Union leaders, the secretary, the waitress, all of this information I compile to make decisions about what's important and what should we be covering. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question? I apologize.
Was there a second part, or we?
Quality of analysts. The quality.
Yeah, the quality of analysts. What do you see the quality of the analysts out there today?
Well, I mean, there are so many analysts that, like I said, I mean, I like the idea that so many analysts at Citi and I like Cowen, a number of analysts actually get their hands dirty and go and do the work and go and see what the catalysts are. My favorite things to read are catalysts. What's important to you now, and what do you think are going to be catalysts for the stock and the company and growth? I think the quality of analyst research has gotten better. I mean, I remember years ago covering Citi and the whole, analyst
issue.
kerfuffle, about conflicts of interest. And, then there was, the cover story about the truth tellers. I think analysts are truth tellers. And I regard analysts very highly. And I think that their work is so important. And I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the research.
Good. Thank you. Right over here.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you, Maria. I just want to thank you for being here, finding the time in your busy schedule to come and meet with us. You're truly a legend.
Oh, thank you.
And I just want to say that I listened to a podcast a few years ago where I got introduced to you, where you were a guest. And you talked about your family and specifically the role of your mother shaping you as a person, and also giving you a lot of advices on money. And now, as a parent myself, I would like to ask you, what is an advice that you would give to parents like myself to help us raise future generation of children who value hard work and who can learn to be financially independent in this world of consumerism, where a lot of things are easily accessible? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, because it is really important. And I can tell you for sure, I was raised with my mother always telling me, don't rely on anyone. Make sure that you are independent and financially independent. Do it yourself. And then the next question is, well, how? And from a little girl, 5 years old, I remember when the ice cream truck would come down the block and I would hear Mr. Softy outside, I would say, Mom, can I get a cone? And she would always say the same thing. Sure, you can have a cone, but how are you going to pay for it? And I said, oh, okay. So little by little, I started saving my nickels and saving my dimes. And then I had a jar of change. And I said, Mom, I have my jar of change. I'm going to go get a cone. Okay, go for it. You have the money. And then it was, okay, well, how are you going to allocate that money? And, we had our own little system where any money that I would get, I would do a third was savings, a third was mine to keep, and a third was, I had to decide it was charity or it was play money. You could decide on that third, but my mom would hold that until we knew what we were doing with it. So it was 3 buckets. And I think it's really important to teach children from an early age about the value of a dollar and about the value of becoming financially independent. And that's definitely what I was raised on. And I remember going to my father's restaurant, the Rex, as a little girl. He would do the books on Monday. I never really knew what that meant, but he would say, no, I have to go do the books. And he would take me, and I would slide all over the floors, and I didn't really know what was going on, but I always knew he was doing the books. So he set the tone. My mother set the tone for me in terms of knowing that if I wanted to do this, I needed to earn it. And if I wanted to go on a trip, I needed to have my own money to earn it. And so I'm so grateful for that. And, I would also say that I think that my parents taught me, I was very close to my parents. I'm a bit of a mama's girl, I have to say. But I remember my mother always said, number one, love what you do. It's really important that you love what you do. In fact, she was the one, when I was studying economics at NYU, she said to me, I think you would like journalism. You should try broadcast journalism. And I said, okay, well, maybe I will. And I switched my major. I took a few classes. I loved it. And then this was really at the infancy, when I graduated, the infancy of business television. So I sort of was able to get in on the ground floor. So love what you do. Number two, she always told me to work hard. There are no shortcuts. And I grew up watching both parents work hard. My father, my biggest vision of my dad always was him standing over a hot stove with a bandana around his head, sweating, cooking. He was always working hard. My mom was always working hard. And number three was to do the right thing. And, I say this sometimes. I've said this when I was speaking at college graduations. And I tell the students, make the commitment today to always do the right thing. You will be thrown dilemmas. You will be thrown curveballs. You need to know now how are you going to catch that curveball. So, know one thing, no matter what you do, no matter what industry you go in, no matter what country you go to, one thing will follow you always, and that is your reputation. So cherish it, protect it, do the right thing, make the commitment today. Those are my 3 rules of success.
That's great. Maria, let me get a question here from Slido here, and I'll adapt it slightly. You started out covering business and markets, and then your role has obviously evolved into a much broader policy, political role here. Some observers say that that has changed their view of your independence as a journalist. From your perspective, how has your approach evolved? And equally importantly, what do you see as a journalist's responsibility in this polarized environment that we were just talking about for the last hour? How have you evolved, and what's the responsibility?
Well, I think it is a tremendous responsibility to ensure that you're giving both sides of the situation and reporting facts. But I think there is some truth to what you are saying there and what the question is, and that is how I have evolved. And I do believe that I'll go back to something that I mentioned earlier, and that is Russia collusion. I knew nothing about politics, and I knew about policy, but I knew nothing about politics when I got to Fox. And when I tripped over this story, that it was completely made up, I was mad. I was like, wow, I can't believe the way this, I thought journalism was competitive. I thought, but politics is next level, that you could make up a story, push it through government, put an intelligence assessment together with embellished stuff and made up stuff about somebody, and then let it go viral across the world. And I felt it was my duty to report what I had learned. And when I reported what I had learned, I think there were some people who said, she's crazy. She's really nuts that she is supporting Trump. It wasn't that I was supporting Trump. I was supporting truth. I wanted to make sure that the truth was out. And people misunderstood that. And I will always defend the way that I am reporting because I am pursuing truth. I just want to get to the truth. And I think it's been an incredible 10 years of constant attacks against this person. And you may hate him or like him, but let's just be honest about what's going on. And so, yes, I think as I got to Fox and I started understanding better about the political dirty tricks that exist, I did say to myself, look, I can't agree with this, and I can't go along with it. And I would not go along with the herds, the sheep of the media attacking Trump. I wouldn't do it because I felt I needed to have balance and be on the other side. And if I was on the other side saying this is the truth, and if I was seen as supportive of Trump and that was a bad thing, well, that's the risk I had to take. Because I'm not just going to get with the herds and report something and be on one side because people don't like him and because there were all these lies. And so that's really what happened. And, I'm sorry if people misunderstood that.
But it actually relates to the next question on Slido, at least my view of it, that it relates. And that is, Citi has survived for 2 centuries by basically continuously readjusting its model, cutting its expenses, focusing, etc. Attempts to use this model in the government have met with resistance. Should government be run more like a business, which also interrelates to some of the stuff that you were just talking about? Do you think that is what's missing here, and the Doge attempt really was a beginning but didn't really execute? What's your view about it?
Yeah, and I don't know why we all don't agree on that. I mean, I think, of course there are decisions to be made, and there are groups that want to answer to their constituents. And, their constituents might want money sent here and, energy and resources sent there. But decisions are hard. You've got to make the decisions, particularly when you're looking at $37 trillion in debt. And so I think that these are hard decisions. I wish that we were more unified. It's not healthy to have the Democrats and the Republicans fighting every couple of months and the government potentially shutting down, which is where we are again right now. And I just wish that, we would see more unity. And that is something that is on President Trump. President Trump needs to be the leader of this nation, and he needs to bring us together. And whatever that means, he'll need to figure that out. But I do think that that onus is on the president. I have confidence that he can do it. It's partly rhetoric, it's partly policy, it's partly understanding where everybody is. But I think, you know, spending during COVID was so significant. We were in an emergency situation. There's got to be conversations happening right now about a responsible way of spending so that we don't have to face a reckoning of $37 trillion in debt. And I think economic security is national security. So these are important issues, and I do think that government would be well served to act more like a business.
Have you interviewed Elon Musk?
I have, actually.
Just as a closing, sorry, I'm taking the liberty of using Slido again.
Yeah. Elon never sat down for an official on-air interview, but he and I talked about it and talked about Doge, and I found him compelling. During the inauguration, I was honored to be sitting with President Trump during the weekend at the dinner before January 20th. And it was funny. We were all sitting there, and it was about, I don't know, maybe 20 people at the table. And Elon wasn't there. Mark Zuckerberg was there, and other people were there. And so as we're starting the dinner, Elon comes over, and he basically jams himself in and gets a seat and puts himself right in the middle. And I thought, wow, this is so odd that he is just inserting himself. But that's what he did, and I thought that spoke volumes. Look, I think President Trump relied on Elon a lot in the beginning. I think the falling out definitely separated his access a bit. But there's no doubt about it, Elon is a mastermind, and he will be very important with Starlink and space and so many other things, electric vehicles. But I'm grateful to have had those conversations with him. But I've never actually had him live in studio. We talked about it, and I could only actually interview him like online.
Maria, thank you. On behalf of everyone at Citi, I want to thank the legend Maria Bartiromo for coming in and spending the time with us.